thank you very much, and it's lovely to be back in Shropshire, and this weather reminds me very much of 2000 and 2007 when the whole county was awash with water, and what's brilliant is to see the flood defences working here, despite what Eric Pickles says. Apparently flood defences don't work. So it's great to be back and see some familiar faces, and I just noticed all colleagues from Adults with Learning Disabilities up there, and I just thought, while I was listening, I was with some providers of adults with learning disabilities nationally, and I said to them, where is the best place in the country? And they said Shropshire. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. So despite everything, there's still really good things going on. Right, okay. So what I was asked to do was to be cheerful. And I think Ian Drury had a song, didn't he? Reasons to be cheerful. But and talk about the future of local government and give you some hope. I'm sorry if I disappoint on that brief, but I'll just go through what I think the future does hold for local government and the immediate future as well. And these are really big issues which I think need to think about rather than sometimes the very local issues which preoccupy us. And the first thing is this autumn and Scottish devolution. And if Scotland goes independent, that will have a massive implication for public service funding in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, because the way that Scotland is funded through its public services is through an obscure formula called the Barnett formula, which was brought in at the time for those oldies of us who could remember that you were only allowed to take 50 quid on holiday with you if you were lucky enough to go abroad. That was brought in then, and that level of that funding was done literally as a quick fix. And what it does is actually give an addition, on the basis of need, and about an additional £4 billion worth of funding for public services in Scotland than you get in England and Wales. Northern Ireland gets a slightly better settlement as well. So that's a big issue, whatever happens, is Scotland. The general election in 2015, I think, is going to be really set the pattern of national politics as well, because it will determine, I think, whether we have another coalition government, which at the moment looks like we might well have another coalition government going forward. We don't know. But I think that will be a really critical point for us in public services as well. The next issue is economic recovery, and I think it's really important when people talk about the economic recovery in the country at the moment, that we talk about it as though it's global, and it's not. It's patchy. It's really patchy. So London and the South East, actually, growth levels and the economy there is actually stronger now than it was before the recession. So what that actually tells you is there are parts of the country which actually remain either completely flatlining or actually considerably worse. So that unevenness of economic recovery is a key issue, and how that is addressed going forward. And then the next issue, really big issue again, is the whole issue of health and the integration of health and social care, and what that means for the way that the public, we, and the health service always refers to everybody as a patient, but actually we, citizens, receive services in relation to health care, and that is going to be a massive issue. So over 50% of local government funding is actually going towards social care, and that as grant reduces, I'll go through that becomes completely unsustainable level of funding if nothing is done to address that situation, because actually it will wipe out every non-statutory services from local government provision going forward. And nobody should know about that more than in Shropshire, where the demographics of the county are so skewed towards a very high proportion of over 80s and a high proportion of, apparently it's old to be over 50. I think we need to push that up a wee bit. Anyway, so that's a really big issue. And I think then the other big changes that are around in at the moment across public services is welfare reform. And that is actually having quite a considerable impact across the country. And again, it's the unevenness of the way that these issues impact in different communities, which is so challenging. So, for example, I don't think anybody would disagree with the concept of simplifying benefits and actually creating a benefit system which incentivises people to work. So that is something which I think everybody would agree with. But if you have a system where the cap of benefits under universal credit is £26,000, £26,000 in parts of the north of England, for example, actually is probably a reasonable amount of money and is actually more than the average salary actually in local government. So actually £26,000 is not a daft figure. But actually £26,000 in London is completely and totally not doable. So there is a big issue about those issues of welfare reform and housing benefits related to the London economy. And then the other issue around that is about getting people into work and the skills agenda. So actually people talk considerably about migration and the economic impact of migration. Actually, for those of us who actually do live in the southeast of England, it is a net economic benefit without a doubt. And parts of our services would literally fall apart without those levels of migration. And that, again, is really not understood and is not universal. So there is a complete disparity right the way through Scotland, throughout the whole of England as well. And we really need to sort out a better settlement for English public services. So what are people saying about how local government is coping? Well, this is the National Audit Office, is the national body appointed by government to talk about public services, and they actually say we're doing really well. And that is true. Actually, local government has been incredibly resilient in the way it's dealt with cuts. But actually, I think what we need to remember is local government has only so far sustained 2 years of a 4-year cuts programme. So actually what we have got is a really interesting dichotomy where the economy is improving, and that is the national message. At the same time, I would imagine the public would expect, therefore, that public services are not going to get much worse, but actually the impact of the cuts will be as great, if not greater, because a lot of the cuts so far have been managed in terms of efficiencies and productivity gains. So actually the frontline services will probably be deteriorating at the same time as we are saying the economy is recovering. And an interesting reflection for myself over the course of the last couple of months with the flooding. I mean, I now live in Oxford, where we've been underwater, to be honest, now for 2 months. And it's interesting for me that the debate is not about who responds to floods. Well, it's the Environment Agency, it's local government, it's the police, it's the fire. And those are all non-protected parts of budgets. And that has not really come out yet. So hopefully when we get through the floods and people look at and reflect on some of that whole issue about protection under austerity does need some looking at. Anyway, so this is how it's impacted across the piece. So if you look at this is look at cuts according to different types of councils in terms of grant. Now, I think what's relevant for Shropshire is for you to look at the larger ones, to be absolutely honest, which are the unitaries, whether it's a London Borough, a Met or unitaries, in terms of the level of grant reductions that have happened. And you're the green block there, which actually shows that level of grant reduction in upper tier councils is quite high, and that's to do with deprivation and the impact of deprivation on funding settlements. So although the Shire District one looks quite small, their budgets are much significantly smaller, so therefore proportionately it would look a lot smaller. And if you add the counties and the Shire Districts together, that would change that figure. But that just shows you that actually it is the upper tier councils that have been taking a big whack of cuts on grant reduction. This is per capita funding across England, and this is quite an interesting one. So given that local government funding changed in 2013-14, best to look from there. That green block is grant from government, And what you can see there through to 2020 is a massive reduction in the amount of grant per capita that will be coming through to local government. And what you will see from the bottom two blocks, which are about council tax and business rate retention, that shows that actually the funding for local government now is becoming much more income related rather than grant related. And that's really brilliant if you can raise income. That's really difficult if you are grant dependent and your ability to raise income is not as good as other parts of the country. So just quickly moving on from that and looking at it in terms of deprivation, with the most deprived being on your left to the least deprived on your right, you will see the largest reductions by far according to deprivation. So, and when I just thought this would be useful for you to have a look at. I saw this actually reading the Metro on the tube one morning, and I thought, blimey, we should use this publicly. If you look at those, if you look at that issue of income, which given our funding is now going to be income predominantly, look at how income has arisen in other sectors other than local government, and you will see that income increases are considerably more than they are in local government. Local government council tax at 15%, and that's from 2008, not from 2010. That would go down to about 5% from 2010. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. So, what we've had is a 43% reduction in funding. That's £15.6 billion gap. That is a gap if you continue to provide the services that you currently provide by 1920. That is £2.2 billion per annum gap in funding in local government as it is now. And I just thought I would add in that issue about the number of older people. 95,000 people aged 67 in 2014 will live to be 100. And that just tells you about... And it was great to hear, I was reading in the paper this morning about that new drug that NICE have just cleared in relation to heart and cholesterol levels. And you think, that's great. I know it's awful. I just thought, God, that's more cost on social care. Anyway, so I thought this would be interesting for you. So when we talk about local government, I've talked about the average figures across the piece. What's really, really difficult for us as a sector is actually it's not even. So this is the council which is what I would call the most favourable, has got the best funding in the whole of the country. The nearer you are to the centre of that spider's web, the better funded you are. This is a district council in the southeast of England. I wouldn't want anyone to think that all district councils are in this position. Believe you me, there are some which are in a parlous state financially, particularly northern districts which are more deprived. But this district council sits alongside a city which is in a very difficult position. This district council is doing incredibly well because it is not grant dependent. So if you look at the one which says funding level, that shows that actually their funding level is so good they actually really, truth be told, they don't really need government grant to be able to provide their services. They have very few people on benefits in the area. Their business rates buoyancy, they are got considerable growth going on, and the way that the funding system is now, with the incentives around income retention around business rates, they are getting quite a lot of income retention around business rates. And their council tax, they've got a lot of house building along the edge of the city. That goes into their area, in the two-tier area, and actually they have got considerable council tax income growth as well. So that council is in an incredibly good position, and the residents of that area and their MPs might well think that that's what the same as all councils. This is the worst funded council in the country. Actually happens to be in the West Midlands. And the nearer you are to the edge, there are 353 councils. The nearer you are to the edge, the more difficult your financial position is. That council it says itself that it is almost bankrupt, and I think you can see it is. And the difficulty that they have is the funding system that we have at the moment. If you're grant dependent, which they are because they're very deprived, they will be, their grant is going down, and disproportionately, therefore, that impacts on them. But the difficulty they've got is the way to deal with that is to get more growth in terms of business so that you get more business rate retention, and to get more house building so that you get more council tax income coming in. The issue is that if they built lots and lots of houses, they would be smaller homes which don't collect as much council tax. And actually, it's not an area where actually it's pretty densely populated already. So they've not got that ability to raise income to get themselves out of their difficult situation. And this is you. This is Shropshire. So you're about middling, actually, in terms of where you are, which for an upper tier council is you're in a particularly not a bad position. So listening to what you've been saying about, you know, the level of reductions across the whole of Shropshire at the moment, what you can see is that you are not one of the most grant-dependent councils in the country. You've not got a hugely high number of people on benefits. As when I was here at the County Council, you've got a very low level of unreserved ring-fenced reserves. That was always been the case in Shropshire. But that will impact on your ability to invest your reserves to generate income going forward. You're not getting a huge amount of growth, and the growth that you need is sheds to get the money from government. And actually, Shropshire's just not the kind of place where you get lots of sheds, so that's difficult. However, there must be quite a lot of house building going on because your council tax bill buoyancy is good. So that shows you in relation to everybody else, and that's just the three together, so you can see that you're by no means the best, but you are by no means the worst as a county. So that all sounds grim, but if you actually ask the public about what their satisfaction levels with local government, they're actually high. So you ask a local community about their satisfaction levels with their council, nationally it is a high figure. Interestingly, however, we did some tracking recently. I just wrote the figures down, and we did the government. This was before the floods. We did the Environment Agency, councils, and government, and the satisfaction levels with councils is starting to drop. Unsurprisingly, it is starting to drop. So it's about 61% at the moment. The Environment Agency got 51%, and government got 11%. So I thought that was interesting. If you go into trust, if we do this as well, how much do you trust your government or your council to make decisions that impact on your life? It's again about 11% government, and it's about 70-odd% council. So that whole issue about being more local is really important. So the way through this, as I said, is the whole issue of devolution, whether it be Scottish or local devolution, from Whitehall to local communities, I would say, not necessarily councils. So if Barnett Formula and the funding of Scotland and the devolved nations was changed, that would significantly push money into England. That doesn't mean if that happened, frankly, that money would go to local government. But my own view is if you get a windfall of about £4 billion, then somebody needs to use that to change the way that public services are funded, so that you push money into prevention rather than constantly dealing with failure, which is what we're doing at the moment with floods, and as we do constantly in health. We deal with crises and failure rather than invest to prevent. We put forward a proposal last year which we've called Rewiring Public Services, and that actually really pushes the whole issue of devolution to places so that you get a huge amount more local decision making. And the new Social Services Better Care Fund, which they say is £3.8 billion, the new money into the system around that is really about £1 billion. And the rest of it is existing money. But that's about integrating health, national health and social care spending so that we really can integrate those services. And with public health, I don't think it's just a public health issue. It's an issue across all our services, the environment very much so as well. It's really investing in prevention and actually not constantly dealing with failure. So that's the way through. So you asked me about steadier times. Well, I think steadier times is difficult, and the challenges behind what I've said as a way through are, if we are going to do all of that, it means, to be honest, that some hospitals are going to have to close. Because if you are preventing, you're actually taking away the need for people to be in hospital beds. I've spent quite a lot of time dealing with the NHS, not just professionally, but personally, recently. And actually, I don't know about anybody else, but actually being in hospital is really grim. And occupying a hospital bed is really grim. Now, it's great for me. I was able to get out of hospital quite quickly. You know, my husband, my kids were around and able to support and help me in the home. That's better for me, and that's better actually for the National Health Service, a lot cheaper. A lot of people, particularly older people, are not in that position to have that level of care and support around them. And that's what we need to do, is we need to get people out of hospital beds into community service provision. It's cheaper, it's healthier, and it's better all round. And that's what we've got to do. But that means that somebody's got to be prepared to say hospitals close. And actually, I'm not really sure just how brave enough we are generally to do that. Now, I did start off life as a librarian, and there's a volunteer in a library. I find that whole issue of volunteers running services an interesting one. But actually, what we need to do is, public services are going to shrink, and they are going to shrink more, whoever gets elected next year. And therefore, we do need to think about what we want to fund, what we can afford to fund, what the public expect, and actually what services the public might wish to actually take some responsibility for going forward. And then the other issues, the bond, the pound notes, is that I think local government's got to start taking responsibility for itself more and being a bit more mature and stop asking for handouts from government. And in stopping asking handouts for government, there are billions of pounds in reserves in councils nationally. We need to be looking at that to see how we can use it to invest, to actually, one, create housing, and two, create a much better level of public service provision across the piece. And I just thought it might be useful, because I know housing was a big priority when I was working in Shropshire. I can't imagine that has changed. And given it is a way out of your financial problems, across the country, 240,000 houses are needed in England. There are currently 100,000 being built. There are planning permissions outstanding for, I think it's something like, I can't remember if it's 400. There's a huge amount of planning permissions outstanding for housing. The private sector house builders say even if at full capacity they were going out developing on every site going, they couldn't do more than 150,000 a year. So what we really need is actually a system where councils and indeed and the private sector are able to work in terms of actually building the homes that people need across the country. There are 1.8 million people on the waiting list for social housing. And there are 26% of 20 to 34-year-olds, one of them being mine, living with their parents. It's a blooming pain in the neck. I was told you get out at 18, but I mean, not anymore, is it? There's just nowhere, particularly if you're, in high-cost housing places for your kids to go. And that's the average age. God, another 10 years before my son goes. And actually, that 184,000 average house price on a salary of 50,000, he has got quite a good job, actually. But in London, where he works, that's $500,000 is the average house price. So it's completely and totally a national crisis that has got to be addressed. So I thought, as I'm here and we deal with the negotiations around pay, which I'm sure Heather will come out very quickly, workforce issues. Those are just some stats around the pay bill. But just coming back to that issue about, response to crises, nearly 500,000 posts have gone out of local government in the last couple of years across the country. That is a lot. That's a 16% reduction. The National Health Service, actually their pay bill's gone up by 1.5%, but they have actually reduced their workforce by about 7%. Central government has reduced their workforce, not at all dissimilar to our loss. They're about 17%. So again, it's a disparate according to whether you've got central government protections on your budgets or not, but that's a lot of posts to lose. The average full-time gross pay is 24,000, which is about the average pay generally nationally. But look at that, 67% of our employees are earning less than £21,000. So that is a distortion, isn't it, within the pay system. And I just thought it'd be useful because I do always like to look at this when everybody goes on about local government pensions being gold-plated. That's the average pension payout, 4,200. And for women who are largely been part-time, it's 2,800. And I know when I was in Shropshire, it was a lot lower than the national. The pay claim is for £1 an hour on as the technical bit about the scale points, and that would come to 1.23 billion, which is 8.3%. So that is being discussed at the moment, the pay claim. I think there's a meeting later this week, Heather, which you'll be at and my colleagues will be at. I would say I think the whole issue about national minimum wage and the fact that that has been raised by central government might be a complication around that issue in terms of the living wage. But just to compare those, that is the national minimum wage at £6.30 an hour currently. We pay £6.45. The NHS, £7.41, and the living wage is £7.65. So that just will do that. Now, it was very interesting. My colleagues, because I've been at home with all my health issues recently, so they put this together. And I think if I was doing it myself, I'd have a picture of Nigel Farage in there as well, actually, because I don't know about anybody else, but I'm a real geek in terms of looking at election results, and I look at every single by-election result in the country for local government. And believe you me, every single by-election, UKIP are taking votes off everybody, and they're taking about 20% of the votes off everybody in by-elections. So I think it would be daft not to. We should have them on there. But next year, looking forward, what we see our job at the moment is really lobbying all of the political parties really strongly to make sure that local government has a different funding base, that we're recognised as a grown-up partner, there is a higher level of devolution, and push that issue of funding for the devolved nations so that England gets a fair deal. So I'll leave it at that point. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
And actually, I don't know whether there's time, but we did a little film that shows all of this. Would it?
You can, yeah, that'd be great.
It's about 2 minutes. Is everybody happy to watch a little film?